Hi, and welcome to episode 45 of Toke Signals TV, where we bring you the biggest in cannabis and hemp news stories every week. I'm Steve Elliott, the editor at tokesignals.com, and I'll be guiding you through the news. After we take a moment to appreciate the beauty of the plant that brings us all here, let's look at our Toke Signals Bud Pick of the Week. I have a young Frankenstein plant here. She's a 100% indica. And this particular photograph is a good illustration of why we go through the sometimes emotionally difficult process of pinching the tops out of our plants. You can see that she's produced two more top sprouts there, right where she just had one before. So, of course, that means increased flowers later on down the road. Let's do the news now, shall we? In Washington State, interesting things are happening as a result of the passage of legalization measure I-502. Drivers are being offered $60 to submit to roadside blood and saliva tests for marijuana. Yeah, if you're driving in Washington State this summer, something odd may happen. While you're at a stoplight, you may encounter people wearing orange vests with signs saying paid voluntary survey. And they may ask you if you want to take blood, saliva, and breath tests for marijuana. They'll give you $60 if you say yes. These government-hired survey teams have already begun asking hundreds of Washington State motorists to provide breath, saliva, and blood samples. And they'll be asking questions, too. The voluntary roadside surveys are a federally funded project to give police and safety agencies a better idea of how many Washingtonians drive high, according to officials. National agencies are working with the Washington Traffic Safety Commission, which is in hurry-up mode to get the data before retail marijuana stores open in Washington State later this summer. That way, officials say they'll have a baseline from which to measure any safety effects of cannabis legalization, according to Commission spokeswoman Jonna Van Dyke. The findings may be used to help local law enforcement decide how much time to spend on marijuana DUI patrols, Van Dyke said. These roadside surveys began last Friday, and they continued last weekend in Spokane and Yakima counties. Kitsap and Whatcom counties will follow, likely this weekend, and maybe King and Snohomish counties as well, Van Dyke said. Teams plan to survey 150 drivers in 5 locations per county for a total of 4,500 participants. The survey crews won't slow or block traffic, at least officials say they won't. Similar studies by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, have caused controversy elsewhere, including a lawsuit in Pennsylvania. Drivers said they felt forced by the cops to stop and participate. The same contractors involved in that study will be running this one in Washington State. That is to say, the Pacific Institute for Research and Evaluation. They've done studies in 30 other states, according to Van Dyke. Officials claim that this time the study has been designed with extra safeguards, such as keeping police off the front line so that it's clear motorists have a choice whether to participate or not. That, of course, remains to be seen. Any biological samples, they say, will be destroyed after the findings are published. That's according to Washington officials. Names and license numbers supposedly won't be recorded, so the samples can't be archived or cross-referenced by government agents, according to Van Dyke. The plan, as amended, sounds apparently okay to the Washington chapter of the American Civil Liberties Union. In other parts of the country, they use law enforcement officers either as an actual roadblock or waving people over, which would have raised our hackles, said Doug Klunder, Seattle-based privacy counsel for the ACLU. State officials claimed it would be more like people waving motorists over for a car wash than getting pulled over by the cops. Last fall, police in Fort Worth, Texas, had to apologize and remove themselves from a NHTSA roadside study after motorists complained that a police presence made them feel forced to participate, according to news reports. General traffic roadblocks were outlawed in Washington State by a 1986 state Supreme Court case, City of Seattle versus Messiani, on grounds they violate Article 1, Section 7, which says, "No person shall be disturbed in his private affairs or his home invaded without authority of law." NHTSA is covering the cost for this month's study in Washington State. And preliminary findings are expected this fall, with a follow-up survey in early 2015 to gauge the impact of the opening of marijuana stores, which are supposed to be open by then. Washington's threshold for driving under the influence of alcohol is 0.08%, and for marijuana, it's 5 nanograms per milliliter. The teams will, quote, urge the driver to give the keys to a sober person or to accept a cab or motel room if they deem them to be impaired, according to Van Dyke. Police officers will be on the scene, supposedly to serve in a secondary role to protect the survey teams, which will sometimes work at night or in tough neighborhoods, Van Dyke said. The effects of pot are considered more difficult to predict than those of alcohol. The survey is meant to check for about 75 substances in addition to marijuana as well. Traces of marijuana can be detected in blood samples several weeks after chronic users stop ingestion, a NHTSA report admits. In Florida this week, Republicans have jumped into the fight against medical marijuana in a big way. A recent poll in Florida has shown support for medical marijuana at almost 90%. That's incredible. The medicinal cannabis question on the ballot could even affect the gubernatorial race. But in a move of questionable political wisdom, deep-pocketed Republicans have raised more than $7.7 million to fight Amendment 2, a proposal which would allow doctors to authorize seriously ill patients to use medical marijuana. Now, the latest financial reports from the two biggest groups fighting medicinal cannabis in the Sunshine State show that the Drug-Free Florida campaign alone has raised $2.7 million, including a single $2.5 million contribution from Las Vegas casino magnate and GOP wheeler-dealer Sheldon Adelson. Adelson, chairman and CEO of Las Vegas Sands Corporation, is one of the richest men in the world, and not coincidentally, one of the biggest donors to the Republican Party. He spent $150 million supporting GOP candidates in the 2012 elections, almost all of whom lost. He likes the ones that tilt way over to the right. Joining the Republicans in their anti-pot fight this week was the supposedly nonpartisan Florida Sheriff's Association, which began sponsoring an inane, almost fact-free, quote, educational campaign against the medical marijuana amendment. Constitutional amendments are required to have 60% of the vote to pass in Florida. According to political wisdom, an anti-marijuana campaign could chip roughly 20% of the pro-marijuana vote away. But with support approaching 90% in some polls, that could mean medical marijuana could still pass in November. Incumbent Republican Governor Rick Scott opposes medical marijuana, while former Governor Charlie Crist, a Democrat who wants to return to office, supports it. Florida Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz muddied the waters recently when she said the amendment is, quote, too broadly drafted, prompting a stinging rebuke from major party donor John Morgan, who called for her removal as chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee. Michael Zinn, National Press Secretary for the Democratic National Committee, was quick to backpedal and smooth feathers, claiming Wasserman Schultz was speaking as a mom and a member of Congress on her personal concerns on a local issue. The DNC has not taken an official position on this ballot initiative, Zinn said. We leave it to the good people of Florida to make that decision. That the Congresswoman would stand on the side of an ultra-conservative billionaire in opposition to the will of the people and the mountains of evidence demonstrating marijuana's medical benefits raises serious questions about her fitness to lead a party that so often emphasizes its commitment to health care, civil rights, and science, said Marijuana Majority's Tom Angel. But this isn't a partisan issue, Angel said. Polls show overwhelming voter support for medical marijuana across the board from all parts of the political spectrum. The Florida legislature last month passed a CBD-only bill that would legalize cannabidiol, a non-psychoactive component of marijuana that is believed to reduce seizures. Governor Scott said he will sign it into law. November's vote will be on an actual medical marijuana law, the kind designed to really help patients instead of just to make cowardly politicians look good. It will allow physicians to authorize medical marijuana for patients with debilitating illnesses. Also in the South this week, big changes are coming. South Carolina, 75% of Democratic primary voters want medical marijuana. South Carolina voters on a non-binding ballot question in the Democratic primary favored the legalization of marijuana for medical purposes by a whopping 3-to-1 margin, 75% to 25% in Tuesday's voting. Now, since the referendum question was non-binding, the vote doesn't mean medical marijuana will become legal. It just means Democratic voters were giving direction to their lawmakers. Think of it as kind of a general survey, said South Carolina Democratic Party Chairman Jamie Harrison. Our House Democratic Caucus wanted to get a good sense of where Democrats were on those particular issues and how to draw up that legislation. Representative James Smith, a Democratic lawmaker from Columbia, said House Democrats will come up with a medical marijuana bill next year. Smith said medical marijuana was obviously overwhelmingly supported in the Democratic primary. But I hear a lot from independents and Republicans who see that as something we ought to think about, Smith said. More than 114,000 people voted on the medical marijuana question in the Democratic primary Tuesday. Earlier this spring, the South Carolina legislature passed a very weak CBD-only bill that would theoretically allow a few children with severe seizure disorders to participate in a study. But the law is so weak that the Marijuana Policy Project and other organizations don't consider South Carolina a medical marijuana state. And speaking of politics and marijuana, in Colorado, Denver could lose a bid for the Republican convention due to legal marijuana. Denver would just love to host the 2016 Republican National Convention. It has historically been a popular city for conventions. The Mile High City's scenic vistas and tourist attractions make it a fun place to visit. But that high thing is the hang, you see. Denver is also the poster child for legal recreational marijuana since Colorado voters approved Amendment 64. Well, big deal, you may be thinking. The voters expressed their will at the ballot box. Isn't that how American democracy works? Not so fast, Grasshopper. While a majority of Americans now approve of cannabis legalization, just 36% of Republicans agree with that position. That means an overwhelming 2/3 of GOP members are against legalizing pot in the 21st century. Denver, undeterred, is still trying to sell itself as the perfect site for the Republican National Convention. But when RNC staffers visited the Mile High City in April, precursor to a larger scouting mission that started last week, the lunch topic turned to marijuana, and the GOP visitors had plenty of questions. Nonetheless, Denver-based boosters of the convention bid say the questions haven't left them worried that legal marijuana might hurt their chances with Republicans, even if members of the GOP are by far the least likely to support such laws. They're more curious about how this is going to play out in other places around the country, according to beer fortune heir Pete Coors, chairman of the Denver Bid Committee. We're the first state, and we're learning how to do it. Will cannabis still be a huge issue 2 years from now? And would late-night comedians like Jimmy Fallon and Stephen Colbert make wisecracks about clueless Republicans wandering into pot shops? Angela Lierance, the Bid Committee's executive director, plays down the impact of cannabis on the GOP's decision. You can't run from it, and we haven't, she said. You cannot pretend that it's not an issue or a challenge for us. She says Denver's and Colorado's message is, it's the will of the people, and we have very thoughtful, smart people dealing with this. By the time the 2016 Republican National Convention rolls around, at least 2 other states could have legal cannabis, and the campaign could be on in a couple more states, according to the experts. In 2014, it'll probably be on the ballot in Oregon again and in Alaska, said Sam Human, law professor at the University of Denver, who has followed the marijuana debate for years. In 2016, it'll probably be on the ballot in California and Nevada and possibly other states as well, Human predicted. Last week, 49 Republicans joined a bipartisan majority in the U.S. House of Representatives to defund Federal Drug Enforcement Administration raids on state-compliant medical marijuana businesses. Full cannabis legalization is definitely moving a lot nationally, and it's moving a lot generationally, according to Human, with only those in their 50s or older wavering in their support. National polls, including for the first time Gallup, have recently put overall support for pot legalization at more than 50%. But Republicans lag far behind national progress when it comes to weed. Just 36% supported legalization in the January CNN poll, compared with 62% of Democrats and 59% of independents. So if the GOP is the anti-weed party, that could be a problem for Denver's chances at the convention. The libertarian wing of the Republican Party is the wild card here. When you're talking about convention delegates, they tend to be party activists, according to Jennifer Duffy, editor of the Cook Political Report. So you've got a fairly decent libertarian contingent who would be fine with marijuana. Meanwhile, if the GOP really is interested in a political future, perhaps it should consider joining the rest of us in the 21st century. Party leaders, Duffy said, might soon realize that the hot-button status of cannabis legalization diminishes every year. To call a spade, if GOP party leaders are really witless enough to be outmaneuvered into letting cannabis become a wedge issue with voters, they'll deserve what they get at the polls. Also in Colorado this week, we have a lawsuit which claims marijuana taxes violate the Fifth Amendment. This lawsuit was filed on Monday in Denver District Court by activist attorney Robert J. Corey Jr., seeking to permanently end Colorado's marijuana taxes on the grounds that paying them violates a citizen's Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination, since marijuana remains illegal under federal law. Corey goes beyond that, accusing Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper and Denver Mayor Michael Hancock of violating the federal Kingpin statute. That's the federal law against operating continual criminal enterprises for collecting taxes on a federally illegal substance. The complaint was filed on behalf of an unnamed licensed medical and recreational marijuana store, as well as the No Overtaxation Issue Committee, which worked against Proposition AA, a marijuana tax issue approved by Colorado voters last year. Also signing onto the complaint were Kathleen Chippy, Larissa Bolivar, Miguel Lopez, and William Chingelis. Corey is seeking a refund of all marijuana tax monies collected by Colorado, as well as unspecified damages. In the event that his suit is successful, it could be the basis for overturning all regulations regarding marijuana in Colorado on those same grounds. As long as marijuana remains illegal under the Federal Controlled Substances Act, states can't require people to give any information about themselves in order to buy or distribute it, Corey claims. Corey cited a 1973 Colorado Supreme Court case, People v. Doolittle, that overturned a man's conviction for selling marijuana without a license because complying with the licensing requirement would have required him to violate his constitutional right against self-incrimination, revealing a violation of federal law. The Colorado Supreme Court held specifically that the Fifth Amendment prohibits state licensing requirements that force a person to reveal a violation of federal law, Corey writes in the complaint. Corey also cited a 1969 U.S. Supreme Court decision, Timothy Leary v. United States, in which the nation's highest court overturned Leary's marijuana possession conviction and ruled that the Federal Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 was illegal due to the fact that a person seeking a tax stamp would be forced to incriminate himself in violation of the Fifth Amendment. Marijuana-specific taxes require plaintiffs and any other person paying said taxes to incriminate themselves as committing multiple violations of federal law, including but not limited to participating in, aiding and abetting, or conspiring to commit a continuing criminal enterprise and money laundering, Corey writes in the complaint. These illegally collected taxes are ultimately laundered by the state of Colorado through J.P. Morgan Chase Bank, which also participates knowingly in the continuing criminal enterprise. It is illegal for government to retain tax monies illegally collected in violation of the Constitution, so all amounts must be returned and all records related to previous tax payments destroyed, Corey writes. The state can't have it both ways, said Kathleen Chippy, a plaintiff and member of the Patient and Caregiver Rights Litigation Project. We have another case pending in the Colorado Supreme Court now, Coates versus Dish Network, where Colorado Attorney General John Suthers argues that medical marijuana patients can be fired from their jobs for using medical marijuana off-duty, even though it's legal under state law. Suthers argues in the Coates case that since marijuana is still illegal under federal law, patients have no rights, she said. Yet Suthers and Hickenlooper, as kingpins in their continuing criminal enterprise, happily collect and spend the marijuana taxes, even though they were collected in spite of multiple clear violations of federal law, Chippy said. And another Colorado story, medical marijuana company fires back at Hershey. A small family-owned medical marijuana company in Colorado, Tinkerbell, on Wednesday responded to allegations made by the Hershey Company in a lawsuit filed in U.S. District Court in Denver that Tinkerbell is selling marijuana-infused candies that resemble Hershey products. The lawsuit from Hershey came as a huge surprise to us, said Tinkerbell President Char Mays, because we changed our entire label line approximately 6 months ago, long before these allegations surfaced last week. Our new packaging looks nothing like Hershey's or anyone else's. Hershey did not contact Tinkerbell before filing suit, according to Mays. The first we heard of it was from a reporter who called last Thursday for a comment on Hershey's lawsuit, Mays said. We were unable to comment because that was the first we had heard of the suit, Mays said. We have yet to be served. Colorado Springs-based Tinkerbell is licensed by the state of Colorado to manufacture and distribute cannabis-infused products. Our mission is simple, said Mays. We wish to contribute to the health and well-being of all medical marijuana patients, as well as assist our beloved community in building a positive reputation for the community and the many dispensaries in the state of Colorado that carry our quality line of products. Tinkerbell's products are only available through Colorado-licensed medical marijuana dispensaries and only with a doctor-prescribed red card approved by the state of Colorado. All of its products are sold only in heat-sealed, non-transparent, child-proof packaging. The suggestion made by some media reports that our products were available to children and even sold side by side with Hershey products is dumbfounding and shows a profound lack of awareness of how infused cannabis products are regulated, manufactured, and sold under Colorado's strict regulatory regime, Mays said. The lawsuit from Hershey has absolutely nothing to do with our current line of quality products, she said. Tinkerbell will continue to operate and to serve our community. Mays thanked her family and friends and members of the cannabis community for their support over the last few days while this story broke. Back to Washington State, where a lawsuit was filed this week against the city of Wenatchee for banning legal marijuana stores. With the first stores selling recreational marijuana expected to open in July, a dark cloud looms over implementation of cannabis legalization measure I-502 in Washington State. Attorney General Bob Ferguson's legal opinion that municipalities can ban the supposedly legal pot shops is that dark cloud. Now a lawsuit has been brought by a man who was denied a license to sell marijuana in central Washington. At least 10 counties and cities in Washington have already banned marijuana businesses, according to the New York Times. 69 more municipalities in 12 counties have instituted moratoriums on pot businesses, and that's according to the Washington Municipal Research and Services Center. A man who was denied a license to sell marijuana in the central Washington town of Wenatchee, right in the middle of apple growing country, is challenging the right of local governments to ban cannabis businesses and also raising the possibility that the law legalizing marijuana could come under sharp legal scrutiny, as the New York Times put it. Plaintiff Sean Preeter has been told by Wenatchee that he won't be getting a license to sell marijuana because pot is still illegal under federal law. Wenatchee apparently believes it needs the federal government's permission before issuing any business licenses. Preeter, who runs an office furniture store in Woodinville, Washington, near Seattle, said he spent about $12,000 in rent for a shop in Wenatchee from which he had hoped to retail marijuana. The Wenatchee City Council is scheduled to meet to decide whether to respond to the suit filed in Chelan County Superior Court. If the city takes the position that federal law preempts state law, this suit could ultimately land in the United States Supreme Court, where the conflicts between state and federal laws on marijuana have never been addressed, according to legal experts. Washington's I-502, which legalized marijuana in the state, could either be affirmed by the courts or struck down. Legalization backers say the statute will be affirmed. We need clarity, said Allison Holcomb, Criminal Justice Director at Washington ACLU and the main author of I-502. She said the ACLU would seek to intervene only if Wenatchee specifically claims federal preemption as its reason for banning pot shops. The federal preemption issue hasn't been resolved, according to Holcomb. Wenatchee Mayor Frank Kuntz said the city cannot afford the legal bills associated with the court battle, but he doesn't have a vote on the 7-member city council. He urged the council last fall to drop the federal law requirement from its municipal code and to grant marijuana licenses, but the council ignored him and instead affirmed the language on a 4-3 vote. Attorney Hillary Bricken, who represents Preeter, said her client has already been harmed by Wenatchee's actions because the Washington State Liquor Control Board, which regulates marijuana in the state, said it will proceed with licenses first in places where local authorities aren't fighting them. Bricken said she would seek an emergency court order blocking Wenatchee's ban if the suit goes forward. You've got councilmen going on the record literally saying we have to go to the federal government to get change before we'll allow our citizens to participate, Brickens said. To me, that is ludicrous, given that we voted for this and votes mean something in this country. Before we go this week, we have a must-read story for you on TokeSignals.com. This is one that generates a lot of heat, needlessly so in my opinion. What's in a word? The great cannabis-marijuana debate. Now, I love the cannabis community, and most of the people working in it have the best intentions and laudable goals. And the challenge facing those of us who wish to re-legalize cannabis is difficult and daunting enough, without those in the movement inadvertently placing additional roadblocks in our own path. One of those roadblocks seems to happen more and more often, and that's arguing over word etymology and usage of all things, rather than working to legalize the plant. Yes, I'm talking about the great marijuana cannabis controversy. Some activists get quite worked up about it, but any pejorative baggage surrounding the term marijuana is at this point really nothing more than an increasingly irrelevant historical footnote from the distant past. There are those within the movement who will tell you with a straight face that the reason the plant is still illegal is because it is called marijuana. Such wild overreaching damages our credibility. And you have to ask yourself, how much chance do we stand of changing the minds of the general public about cannabis when we spend most of our energy fighting amongst ourselves about what to call the damn stuff? You want to read that for yourself. It is a quite lengthy piece, but worth your time, and it goes into the fascinating history of the word marijuana and the part it has played in the counterculture. Until we meet again, I hope you stay lifted. See you next time.